Well, there's a lot going on in the world of politics tonight, even outside of Georgia's runoff election. We now know that California Senator Kamala Harris will complete the 2020 Democratic presidential campaign ticket. Presumptive presidential nominee Joe Biden made the announcement this afternoon. Now, if elected, Harris would be the nation's first female, first black, and first Asian American vice president. The virtual Democratic National Convention begins Monday. Joining us now to give us some perspective on this upcoming situation that we're about to undergo here are Dr. Andra Gillespie and Mike Hatzer. Andra is the director of the James Weldon Johnson Institute and associate professor of political science at Emory University. And Mike is a GOP consultant. We want to thank both of them for being with us. We hear from you guys a lot. Now, while we have been watching and waiting for this vice presidential pick, we know that Georgia Democrat Stacey Abrams and Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms were on Joe Biden's shortlist. Mike, when we polled Georgia voters, 31% said they were extremely unfavorable of Joe Biden. So do you think that this pick of Kamala Harris over some Georgians will move those numbers at all?
No. I think as far as Georgia goes, the electorate is split virtually right down the middle. It's so perfectly split that if it were a piece of cake, siblings couldn't fight over it. Kamala Harris is a strategic pick for Joe Biden. She doesn't bring any extra electoral votes the way Stacey Abrams might have put Georgia in play. And I think Georgia is really going to be one of a handful of key states to deciding the presidency this year in terms of electoral votes.
So what do you think pushed Kamala to the top of the list to be the presumptive pick for Joe Biden here?
Well, I think she brings a certain hands-on aggressiveness. People have described her as being ambitious, but that doesn't mean she's not accomplished and skillful. She has an edge to her personality that offsets the sort of bumbling Uncle Joe image that sometimes comes across with Biden. Awesome. She's a very good foil for him in terms of professionalism, poise, being gaffe-free, all of the things that you want to complement the top of the ticket.
There was a lot of talk about selecting an African-American woman. Do you think that that will impact what we see going forward as well?
No, I think Biden made a promise and now he has kept it. I think the expectation was African-American female will be the vice presidential nominee for the Democrats. It's historic. It's not unprecedented except for the African-American part. But I think that Kamala Harris shows that she is the most poised, confident, and in the back of everyone's mind, ready to take over the presidency should she have to.
Dr. Gillespie, let's bring you in. What are your takeaways from this selection of Senator Harris?
It's not a surprising choice, and in fact, Senator Harris is very much a consensus choice. Vice President Biden had a number of great picks. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. And I think kind of relative to some of the other candidates, Senator Harris's strengths kind of outmatched her weaknesses. So as case in point, the Trump campaign has already tried to nickname Kamala Harris Phony Kamala. I don't think that actually rings as resonant as perhaps Communist Karen or Crazy Liz would have, as pejorative as these all are. And I think that actually speaks to part of the reason why Vice President Biden chose her. She's not going to be universally loved by everybody, but she could be acceptable to all sides.
Moving on to today's runoff election, we've seen a much smaller turnout today, as well as fewer reports of voters experiencing problems out there. But according to our poll, 79% of Georgia voters say that they will certainly vote in November. So, Andra, based on what we saw back in June during the primary, what are some things that you think we should be looking out for?
Well, one, I think people need to just look out for to make sure that they get their absentee ballot requests in on time and to make sure that they receive their ballots and that they turn them in, whether to a drop box or via the mail, in a timely fashion so that they can ensure that they are received. I think local election boards need to make sure that they have an ample number of volunteers who are available. And I certainly would encourage people who are under 65, who are healthy, to perhaps consider volunteering for the first time and to make sure that they get adequate training on how to use use the new election machines. And then also, I think the thing that we also always need to pay attention to is to just make sure that the Secretary of State's office and local election boards allocate an appropriate number of machines to all of the precincts within their purview to try to make sure that we can try to minimize the amount of time that people have to wait on lines.
Mike, we've heard a lot about a lack of preparation or whether there has been enough. How much responsibility is on the state versus the counties to make sure things are going smoothly on Election Day?
It requires a great deal of cooperation between the state and the county. The county is the ultimate decider, if you will, about how many precincts get opened, which ones get opened, which used, how many machines they were from the state. Ultimate responsibility falls on the local elections officials. That said, the state must be cooperating and must be doing everything they can to make sure that the necessary equipment is available. The enthusiasm meter for this electorate come the fall is going to be off the charts on both sides. And there is going to be a record level of turnout and a record number of absentee ballots by mail, which means that our results are probably not going to be known on election night. There's going to be a whole lot of waiting and wondering while these ballots get counted. And we need to make sure that the Secretary of State's office and the local elections officials are in sync come Election Day.
All right, Mike Haster and Dr. Andra Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us. We will be seeing you throughout the night as we wait for those results to come in. So we thank you again for sharing your time and expertise with us. For live updates on the runoff election, you can always check out our blog on 11alive.com. You can also find it in our 11 Alive News app.